Welcome now to our closing keynote of PyScore 2022. Now, we're not going to have a Q&A at the end of this one, which means you just get to sit back, relax, and have a little listen. So it's my pleasure to introduce Jeff van Dyck, who is going to be talking about his process, aesthetics, and methodology.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff van Dyck, and I'd like to thank Cam and the crew and Rad and everybody at APRA for inviting me to speak here. It's quite an honor to be speaking here, and I hope you've all had a great high score. I've had a very high score. I've had a great high score. I was very high through the whole thing. Kind of wishing I was now. For those that don't know me, I'm a composer, a sound designer, and occasionally an audio director. So vision and variety, establishing an aesthetic. Apparently, I'm going to draw links between my recent work and how I craft distinctive and cohesive sound worlds for each game, while staying true to my own aesthetic and methodology of creating sound. I don't want to talk about that. I don't even know how I would talk about that, to be honest. It sounds a little wanky to me. And look, if you want to talk to me about it, I'm going to be at the pub later, so we can talk about it over a beer, and maybe we can turn it into a drinking game, and anytime somebody says the word aesthetic, you got to scull your drink. All right? So, sorry, Cam. Not going to talk about that. No, see, I'm a very practical person. I think practical is useful. And if I'm going to be given this unique opportunity to give a closing keynote, I think I'd rather pass on some useful advice to you, hopefully useful, because I've been working in this industry for 30 years. There must be something I must have learned along the way, right? So what's practical? Breathing is practical. Breathing's good, yep. It's free. It's free. For now. I can imagine in the future we might have like 2 terabyte phone plans with 60 liters of oxygen. Sorry, no, I'm not going to go all dark and political here. That was just breaking the ice a bit. What else is practical? Eating is practical. It's good. Very good. But it's not free. It's not free, is it? The term starving musician comes to mind, a term used since forever, and I was a starving musician for several years in my youth, and I ate this sort of stuff. I was always trying to get that next gig, that next opportunity that could buy food. Or hair gel, because it was the 80s, This is what we all looked like in the 80s. Actually, this is what I looked like in the 80s. Thank God that photo is blurry. All right. So, seeing as how we have to work to eat, how about a show of hands, actually? Who's here because they're looking for work or hoping it will lead to work? Okay, yeah, quite a few of you. I think this is good because this is the right place. You're at the right event. This is networking. It can truly lead to work. Showing your face at an event or a local indie dev meetup can have huge benefits. My friend Sanat Mishra, who I call Nart, or we all call him Nart, he calls these intangible benefits. You're never quite sure how networking is going to benefit you, but inevitably it does. And I don't think you need to do the big sell and push yourself onto people trying to get a gig. You just need to put yourself out there, be visible, make sure your music or demo is easy to find online, and be social to some degree. Now, for some of you, including myself, this social part can be difficult. I'm a bit of an introvert, actually, and can understand how confronting this can be. I'm not qualified to tell you how to fix this, so I'm not going to say, but I can only speak from experience. You know, the anxiety can be excruciating. And I've had to push myself out of my comfort zone to do this talk. But this conveniently leads me to the real title of my talk, Comfort Zone 3, The Awakening. In a world, in a place in the world. For this talk, I was doing a lot of self-reflection to see if I could identify a pattern that has worked for me that I could pass on to you as advice. And interestingly, I started to see one. Here's a selection of games that I've worked on over the years. And it turns out there's like 3 significant points in my life where I took a chance, did something different or counterintuitive to me, out of my comfort zone, and ultimately good things happened. It's these 3 events that I want to analyze with you to see if there's see if there's a useful takeaway for you. So, let's go way back to 1992. I am from Vancouver. It's a beautiful city. Looks like this for about 3 days of the year. And the rest of the time it's just clouds. My mom was a singer. My dad was a multi-talented musician and electronics engineer. Did I mention I'm a high school dropout? I'm mostly proud of this. But recently, my dear friend Tarny Williams said that he used me as an example to his kids. He said, you better finish school or you'll end up like Jeff. And he pointed out to me what a bad decision it was to drop out and how I gave myself every chance to fail spectacularly. And he wasn't wrong. I really struggled to get a job. So how did I get from being a high school dropout and a starving musician to standing here now? Clearly eating, regularly. So through my teens and early 20s, I was in various bands and was recording 80s and 90s pop music. We released albums, shot videos, went on tour, played stadiums, but ultimately none of it went anywhere because the music biz is hard. In 1991, look, video games have always been a part of my life, ever since Pong, And in 1991, I was playing NHL hockey on the Sega Genesis with my roommates. We would play for hours. Actually, I had a question, a curiosity. In 1991, is there anybody here who hasn't been born yet? Okay, I feel really old now. Yep. Okay, so a friend of mine told me that he saw an ad in an employment paper stating that Electronic Arts Canada was looking for an audio programmer. Now, I was perfectly capable of writing and producing electronic music in the studio by this time, but my programming skills were, how shall I say, lacking. And I felt, though, that if I was given the opportunity to create audio in these games, I could do a good job of it. I was convinced that it was going to be my calling. Despite the fact that I wasn't a programmer. I decided to apply for the programming job despite the fact that I wasn't a programmer. I was really stepping out of my comfort zone, thinking, wouldn't these people think I'm some sort of fraud, But I felt I had no choice, and this opportunity was never going to happen again. So I arrived at EAC for the job interview and was given a tour. It was massive. There was like 100 people working there. This is the crew that was working there at the time. I'm not in this photo because I didn't get the job yet. If you know your old game dev celebrities, the person in the front row, second from the left, is a fellow named Don Matrick. He was running the show. He went on to Xbox fame at Microsoft. I met all the folks there in the audio department, and I even knew a couple of them from the past, so I thought, oh, I'm in here with a chance. But then I was put into a boardroom full of programmers, and they were leering at me over my single-page resume, clearly unimpressed. And they said,
It says here, Jeff, you have programming experience. Did you go to university?
no, I'm self-taught.
What about programming languages?
I know a little bit of BASIC, a bit of assembly, a bit of C.
I see. So, how would you go about making an audio driver?
Well, I'd probably consult with you folks. I'd go from there. I tend to learn as I go, and with that, the interview was over. I was shown the door, and the next day I got a letter in the mail saying thanks but no thanks, and yeah, sadness. I was bummed, really bummed. A dark cloud followed me for the next few weeks, and then one day I got a call on my answering machine. Now, we used to have these answering machines that had like these cassette tapes, and the voice would get recorded onto the cassette tape, and the technology was amazing. Anyways, you used to have to remember people's phone numbers. Anyways, it was Mike from EA, and he said to call him, and I buzzed him back, and he said, apparently you're a crap programmer, Jeff, but we really like the sound of your demo tape, and we're wondering if you could help us with some sound effects in a hockey game. A few days later, they gave me the job, an office with a view of the Vancouver Mountains, a dev kit, this thing called a Macintosh, and I was a pig in mud. I was a kid in a candy store. And as I started to work there and get paid, I had to pinch myself to make sure I wasn't dreaming, because I was doing exactly what I wanted to do at that moment, and I never wanted it to stop. This, interestingly, is more or less the stuff I was given in '92. So that was a Mac II SI. I was using Mark of the Unicorn Performer. Email was in DOS. That's Windows 3.1. Yeah, it was archaic. That blue thing is the Sprobe thing, which Electronic Arts reverse engineered a Genesis development kit to avoid having to pay Genesis or pay Sega the fee for developing. Anyways, that's an interesting story in itself. Okay, so what's the takeaway here? There are jobs out there that aren't advertised. It pays to have a good sounding demo. This is pretty obvious kind of stuff. Strong song first. Attention span of the listener is short, don't waste time. Applying for a job that's a little beyond what you can do may in fact open another opportunity. But be prepared for rejection, but it isn't the end of the world. In some ways, it pays to step out of your comfort zone. Okay, so 5 years later, 1997. Anybody born yet in 97? Or who isn't born yet in 97? Sorry. Yeah, right, okay. It was still a big, young crowd here. For what it's worth, I was born in 69. So there you go. Now it's 5 years later. I'm still at EA. I've been promoted to senior composer. I'm well paid, very comfortable. I was recently married. Life was good, almost too good. At EA, there was talk of them starting to use licensed music in their games and not really needing composers anymore. Us composers were to transition into audio leads and managers and audio directors. But at this stage, I was also getting a little tired of writing sports music, basically, is what EA needed me to do. And I was keen to branch out into new genres. So despite having this awesome job that I loved, lots of benefits and stock options, I once again stepped out of my comfort zone, and to everyone's shock at EA, I tendered my resignation. What was my plan? Move to Australia, because my wife is Australian, and hope that I can find a similar job here. So goodbye, EA. Yeah, that was the route. I didn't walk. So when I first got to Brisbane, started phoning around the devs in Brisbane, 1997, and came across this game called Dark Reign. I don't know if you guys remember Dark Reign. It was a really good game, and it was really popular, and it was developed in Brisbane. And I thought, oh, this is looking promising. I met with them, and nothing came of it, despite having experience and what have you. And they had this amazing recording studio. But yeah, nothing came of that, so that kind of sucked. Then I moved down to the Gold Coast. And a few months later, while I was walking my dog around the area, I discovered I moved 2 blocks away from EA Australia. I had no idea that was there. It was such a random thing. I dropped in, talked to some of the folks, and after a few chats, they hired me to write some music on their sports games. Except now it was the Aussie version, right? So it went from NHL and NBA to AFL, cricket, and rugby. I still don't understand cricket. I've been living here since then. I still don't understand it. I still fall asleep like everybody else does, though. These games, EA Australia was acting as the co-publisher for these games, along with another company called Dreamtime Entertainment that's based here out of Melbourne. I had to laugh that I'd moved to the other side of the world to start again, only to find myself right back where I was. You know, I really was just doing the same thing. It was, however, buying food, so that was good. Interestingly, the developer they hired to make these games was the Creative Assembly in the UK. So they had started their career in sports games for EA, but then Creative Assembly made this little game, and this was a significant game for me because it basically put me on the map, I guess, as a composer of non-sports game music. And they showed me a prototype of this game, and they said, "Can you write authentic Japanese music?" And I said, "Of course." There's only one answer to that. And yeah, this is definitely a piece of advice. Always say yes, even if you don't know how to do it, and then go learn how to do it, you know? I mean, the fake it till you make it cliche has flown around, but it's very true. I learned how to do it, and this was before YouTube. So I actually went to the Gold Coast Japanese Cultural Center and asked them if they knew of any taiko drummers or koto players, and actually they did, and I talked with them and ended up using them, which was really cool. All right, so what's the takeaway now? Let's see. Leaving a cushy job to move across the world in hopes of finding a better job is scary. My career seemed to move forward despite quitting my job. You can find places to work while walking your dog. Woof. And there he is. He was such a good boy. He was such a good boy. Cold calling places, looking for work rarely works, but you can sometimes uncover a gem. Stepping out of your comfort zone and attempting all of the above is worth a try. Worst thing that can happen is nothing will change. Try again. All right, so I've gone back to this slide to refresh the timeline. After years of working on Total War games, Creative Assembly did this game called Alien Isolation, on which I was the audio director, and it was awesome. After years of Total War, this was refreshing. But there was a problem. CA, Creative Assembly, wanted me to move to the UK to be more effective as their audio director, which made perfect sense from their perspective. While I was working on Alien Isolation, I was in the Valley in Brisbane and bumped into my friend and colleague, Nart. And he said, "Hey, Jeff, Tim Dawson and I just quit working at Sega," what was Creative Assembly Australia, and we're working on our own game. We'd love to show it to you and get some audio advice. I said, awesome, sounds great. We met up a couple days later, and I played their game, which I loved. It was a great game. And they said, who would you suggest we hire to do the music and sound effects? And to their shock, I told them they should hire me. And I would love to work on this game. And Nart was like, what? But you're this big-time AAA audio guy. How can we possibly afford you? And I said, well, what if I was to become one of your partners? You guys are taking a huge risk doing this for no money. I'd like to take that risk too and be part of the team. We all came to an agreement, and Witchbeam was formed. We then proceeded to develop and release Assault Android Cactus. And while that was going on, I still had to provide for my family. So I still did a bit of stuff for Creative Assembly, but it was no longer full-time. And was becoming more and more sporadic. In fact, there was a point where Creative Assembly wanted me to move there, and which I considered, but now there was more at stake now. Not just my comfort zone, but my family's. We were very comfortable down at the Gold Coast. My daughter was in school. We had local friends and family. I did go to the UK to do due diligence on moving, and in the end, this was one of those cases where I decided to stay in my comfort zone because I didn't want to put my family through the stress and upheaval of moving overseas. And in the end, saying no to the move over put the nail in the coffin of my career with Creative Assembly, and that was more or less the end of my AAA career. But it was also the start of my indie career. Cactus initially released in 2015 and released new platforms over the next 4 years, and it was a mediocre success. Critics loved it. It didn't generate a lot of income, but it wasn't nothing either. And you don't need a game to be a hit to make money. It can be a mediocre hit can still make useful money. Obviously, it's a lot nicer when it is. So while I was working on Cactus, I started working with other indies. Defiant, who did the Hand of Fate series. I became partners in Earthwork Games, who make a game called Forts. It was released in 2017, and we're still developing for it. We just released DLC not long ago. I started working with Uppercut Games on their beautiful Submerge series. That was more of a contract scenario, so I'm not always partnering up, but that was just a contract because that's what they wanted. And then I started working on Paint the Town Red with Southeast Games, and that wasn't a partnership, but it was like a profit share kind of scenario. All of these companies are indies with varying degrees of success. Some of these were contract gigs, and some of them I became partners with. I took the same risk they were taking. No money up front, and it turns out, in most cases, it was worth the risk. But don't forget, it was definitely a risk, and so, be careful. You really got to trust the people you're partnering up with. Also, not every indie is interested in another partner. But there are some things I think you can do to help sway things in your favor should you want to become a partner. An interesting thing in my personal development as a partner in an indie, I got my lost in my notes. Indie teams are small, right? And each partner tends to become multifaceted in their skill set. So programmers become designers, or dare I say artists. Animators dabble in audio or design. Designers start looking at pitch decks and considering publishers. For myself, I started to become more involved in making trailers because I found my music production skills translated to video editing and production. There's a kind of a similar vibe there. I also had to become more skilled in biz dev because as a partner, you're one of the people responsible for signing on the dotted line with contracts and stuff. So you need to know what's going on in the publishing deal, and I'm still trying to learn this stuff today. All right, one more takeaway. So what's the takeaway from this? Switching from full-time AAA to indie is risky and potentially rewarding. Indie partners have multifaceted skill sets. Audio people can become more than just the audio person. They can help with marketing, trailers, community, game design, production, biz dev, help guide the company. And to be honest, us audio people tend to need to do all this for yourselves anyways, marketing and biz dev, it's all the same, sort of similar thing. I found, as an audio person, it's possible to be involved with multiple indies. Just don't burn out. I've made that mistake before. Stepping out of your comfort zone to work in a new way can prove fruitful. So let's summarize what all these things I've just told you. 92, got a job at EA. I took a chance and applied for a job that I didn't qualify for. This was stressful. I felt a bit dumb in the interview, but I had an ulterior motive. There was a job there, it just wasn't advertised. And I think that happens a lot. So I guess the question is, was I lucky or did I somehow make my own luck, by putting myself in that situation? 97, I left a cushy job at EA. I took a chance that I could get a job overseas. And I was nervous about the dev scene in Australia. But these days, game dev is happening everywhere, so if it doesn't work for you here, there's lots of opportunities all around the place, all around the world. And also with all the remote working that's going on now due to COVID and what have you, there's lots of opportunities out there, both AAA and indie. I became self-employed, got work through EA. It wasn't ideal in terms of what I wanted to do musically. Cricket is only so stimulating. But it was a gig. But that also led to the Creative Assembly and the Total War series and Alien Isolation. 2015, I left Creative Assembly. I took a chance that I could survive working with indies. And, this turned out to be the best decision for me. But I did learn a lot at EA and Creative Assembly. So if you get the opportunity to work at a AAA, I highly recommend it. You will learn so much, all about project management and collaboration and just how to do stuff, how to organize yourself and what you do. I'm trying not to make it out to be the evil thing, an evil thing. It wasn't an evil thing. It's just that in my career path, it was at the beginning, and now I don't do it anymore. And I don't need to either. And this led to helping me form Witchbeam and joining others. And Witchbeam, to this day, still continues to release titles. So, where are things at now? What happens in part 4? Well, the company that I helped form, called Witchbeam, used the money it made from Cactus to pay for the development of our most recent game, Unpacking. So that went well. Its success has been beyond anything we imagined. Talk about buying food. In terms of my comfort zone, though, I'm still trying to push myself out of my mental boundaries and trying to, giving talks, going to dev meetups. I'm also having a go at game development myself, learning how to do blueprints in Unreal and design my own game. So, watch this space. But what does this all mean, Jeff? I ask myself. What can I say? I didn't take the beaten path. I took a couple of chances and some risks. And look, don't take this as gospel, but if you're spinning your wheels and not moving forward, maybe it's time to try doing things differently. I've said comfort zone an unnatural amount of times, so I'm not going to say that again. Instead, I'm going to leave you with a quote from my favorite takeaway menu. Give the chance to yourself, you wouldn't be forget it forever. Thank you very much.